Not believing in something is the reason that you fail. Welcome to McBain Moments. So today I just wanted to talk a few minutes about one of my favorite lines in Star Wars. And there's going to be a lot of giggles and rolled eyes, and that's fine. But in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker is training with Yoda. And by now, I don't care if you're a geek or not, you know who these two people are. And if not, Google. So on Dagobah, Luke is training under Master Yoda, and Yoda's trying to teach Luke how the Force not only permeates everything, but is the most powerful thing in the universe, except maybe love. And so Luke's X-Wing sinks into the swamp. And Luke realizes, oh crap, I can't leave without getting this massive ship. Basically, it is a fighter. It's a starfighter. So it's basically an F-16. And an F-16 is a flying lawn dart, but you get the picture. And so he tries to use the Force to lift it out, but because he has no faith in himself, it doesn't work, right? It just ends up sinking into the swamp, completely submerged. And Luke says, well, there I go, I'm screwed. That's it. That's the end. I give up. And then Yoda, who is technically Yoda's a Muppet, but he's 3 feet tall, short little arms, doesn't look powerful. That's the point. He doesn't look powerful. He's not supposed to look powerful. Now, those of us who have lived in the Star Wars canon for 20 years know what power is behind Yoda, but just at this point, the person who would have just watched The Empire Strikes Back for the first time 20 years ago would be like, what kind of power can this supposed Jedi Master have? And Yoda then uses the Force to lift the X-Wing out of the swamp bog, which of course is basically quicksand, and set it on relatively dry ground. Now, keeping in mind this is a swamp. And Luke stares at the X-Wing as it's just hovering through the air by the sheer will of Yoda alone. And he looks at Yoda and he looks at the X-Wing and he goes, I can't believe it. And Yoda looks back at him and just deadpans, yes, and that is why you failed. The point of that whole thing, that whole summary of the scene, and go and watch the scene. If I had any video editing ability at all, I'd embed it in this. Go and watch the scene and think about it. Think really hard about it. Because the reason you fail probably 50% of the time is strictly because you don't believe you can actually do it. Now, there may be a skills gap, and that's probably the other 50% of the reason that you might fail at something. But every time you fail at something, you're learning something about it. Every time you try to bake a cake and you fail to make the cake, you can tweak the recipe a little bit. And technically you don't fail to bake the cake, but maybe the cake tastes like sandpaper, and that's not a good thing. But you learn something about it, about the process. Maybe you need to bake it a little at a lower temperature or at a higher temperature. Maybe it needs to be in the oven a little less time. Maybe you need to use more sugar. Maybe you need to use less sugar. Maybe it's a pinch of salt and not a dish of salt. So every time you fail, look at the mistakes you made. Say, okay, this is where I screwed up. Let's tweak this and try it again. And you don't need to necessarily make, these huge changes. A lot of times, a really tiny fix changes the whole picture. And I think that's where people get overwhelmed. They don't realize that 90% of your failures are due to very small problems in the methodology. It's like in fencing. In fencing, 90% of the reasons that a person loses a fencing match, I won't say 90%, but at least 50% of the reasons that you lose a fencing match is usually due to movements in the values of inches, not feet, inches. I have literally won and lost fencing matches just due to the degree in which my sword was turned. Because if it's not turned right and another blade hits it, the power of my blade is relative to the degree in which it's turned against the enemy blade. So if it's like this, blade sharp on sharp, I'm going to have a lot more strength than sharp on flat. So whenever you run into an issue, let's say you are trying to learn a skill, doesn't matter what the skill is, whether it's building toy soldier models like Warhammer or toy soldier models, miniatures. And I'm someone who has a large collection of them. Actually, I've got 2 full armies I haven't touched in like 5 years. Whether they're miniatures or it's painting or sculpting, fencing, sales, becoming a doctor, and hopefully you're practicing on things that aren't living if you're becoming a doctor or veterinarian. But eventually you get to that point. It doesn't matter how many times you fail. You can fail n times. The importance is that you always try n+1. You keep trying, you keep tweaking. Find a mentor. Find someone who can teach you what you're doing wrong. My favorite thing to do after fencing for a day is to go to people who I know are better than me and say, okay, you went a few rounds with me. What am I doing wrong? Name one thing that you saw that I did wrong. And 90% of the time, they'll feed me just a piece of information that I can work on. Just a little bit. It's just like, okay, at this point, this is the mistake you made. And you're going to run into those people who aren't interested in actually helping you. And they're going to be jerks about it. But you know what? Sometimes that's just part of life. And so if you're constantly running into the same issue, if you've plateaued, which happens to all of us in every skill set ever, find a mentor or a teacher and say, look, here's where I'm at. This is my issue. Can you please help me? And they might say no. You find someone else. Or they might say, you know what? I can't help you for this reason or that reason, or maybe we're not necessarily compatible personality-wise, but that person over there is also a good teacher and they would fit you better. And that actually happened to me in fencing 5 years ago. That's how I met my mentor in fencing. So I'm going to leave it with that. Go out there. Don't worry about failure. Keep trying. This has been a McBain moment.